Forget everything you think you know about fairies. The modern world took some of the darkest creatures in European folklore and turned them into bedtime decorations. Tiny, glowing women with delicate wings. Harmless little spirits hiding in flowers. Magical creatures that grant wishes and guide lost children home. But travel back a few centuries into the villages of Ireland, Scotland, England or Wales, and you find something very different. There was no single fairy mythology. Different regions had different names, different creatures, and different rules. But the same warnings appear again and again. Do not offend them. Do not follow them. Do not interfere with the places they claim as their own. And above all, do not let them take you. For many people, these were not harmless stories. They were explanations for why a healthy child suddenly became sick, why an animal died without warning, why a traveller disappeared on the road, why strange music came from an empty hill in the middle of the night. People left milk, butter, bread or other food in places associated with the hidden people. Sometimes the offering looks less like a gift than protection money, a small price paid to keep something powerful from noticing your family. Even the names could be dangerous. In some communities, people avoided speaking directly about fairies at all. Instead, they used respectful names. The good people, the fair folk, the people of peace, the good neighbours. The compliment was not necessarily affection. Sometimes it was caution. Imagine a winter night in early modern Ireland. A small house stands alone beyond the last lights of the village. Wind moves through the trees. The fire has almost burned down. The family stays close to the hearth because outside the walls there are roads that belong to humans, and places that supposedly do not. A sound comes from somewhere beyond the house. Maybe footsteps. Maybe music. Maybe nothing more than the wind. Nobody goes outside to investigate. The child nearest the door is pulled away from it. And among the objects people trusted for protection was iron, a knife, a pair of scissors, a poker from the fire. Not because anyone could explain exactly why iron worked. Folklore rarely bothered with explanations. It simply warned that certain beings feared it. But the greatest fear was not that something would come into your house and kill you. It was that something would come into your house and leave with one of you. The changeling tradition appears across Ireland, Scotland, and other parts of Europe. The basic idea was horrifyingly simple. A human being, very often a baby or young child, was taken by the hidden people. Something else was left behind in the same place. Sometimes the replacement was described as a fairy child. Sometimes an ancient being disguised in a young body. Sometimes the stories barely explained what it was. They only described how the parents knew. Picture a young mother waking in the middle of the night. The room is freezing. Her baby is crying in the cradle, but the cry sounds different, too sharp, too harsh, almost unfamiliar. She lights a candle and walks toward the bed. Yesterday the child was healthy. Tonight the skin looks grey, the body is thin, the eyes seem strangely old. The child demands enormous amounts of food but does not grow stronger. In some changeling stories, that impossible appetite is one of the first signs. In others, the creature eventually gives itself away by speaking with the knowledge or voice of someone far older than the body it occupies. To the terrified parent, there is only one explanation. The baby in the cradle is not their child. Their real child is somewhere else. Under a hill, inside a mound, beyond the human world. And this is where folklore stops being harmless. Because some traditions offered methods for forcing the hidden people to return the person they had supposedly stolen. Those methods could be brutal. The changeling might be exposed to fire, threatened, abandoned outdoors, placed somewhere dangerous. The logic was that the beings responsible would recover their own creature and return the human they had taken. Think about what that belief could mean in the real world. A child becomes seriously ill. A child stops developing normally. A child has a disability that nobody around them understands. The parents do not see disease, they see evidence. They believe the real child is still alive somewhere beneath the earth. And suddenly, hurting the child in front of them can be interpreted as an attempt to save the child they remember. Fairy belief did not only shape stories, it could shape the way people interpreted misfortune. And that influence extended beyond the cradle. There were places where people believed the hidden folk moved across the landscape along invisible routes, often described as fairy paths. A house built across one of these paths could become the center of strange stories. Doors would not remain closed. Objects moved. Animals became restless. Unexplained sounds passed through the building at night. Some traditions claimed that openings had to be left unobstructed so that the unseen procession could pass directly through the house. Imagine living in a place where the safest response to something crossing your property at night was not to stop it. It was to get out of its way. Protection became part of everyday folklore. Iron appears again and again. Scissors might be placed near a newborn. A knife or other iron object might be kept close to a bed. Metal could be carried while traveling. Horseshoes later became famous as symbols of good luck. But iron objects in general had a much wider reputation as protection against supernatural forces. No one agreed on why iron worked. They simply agreed that it did. And iron was not the only defense. In some traditions, salt had protective power. Religious objects and prayers entered the same world of belief. Church bells were sometimes said to drive older supernatural beings away. Stories even developed in which fairies retreated from settled land because the sound of Christian bells had become impossible for them to endure. The landscape was changing. Forests were cut. Roads were built. Churches rose above villages. And folklore imagined the old inhabitants retreating deeper into the margins, into hills, into ruins, into remote valleys, into places where the sound of bells could no longer reach them. Travel at night was another problem. A ring of mushrooms in a field might seem harmless today. In older folklore, a fairy ring could mark the place where supernatural beings danced. Walking into one was dangerous. Joining the dance was worse. And if a traveller became disoriented, one strange protective trick appears in several traditions. Turn part of your clothing inside out. A coat, a jacket, a piece of cloth. Why this was supposed to work was not always explained. Again, the rule mattered more than the mechanism. Because if the protection failed, the danger was no longer that the hidden people would enter your world. The danger was that you would enter theirs. The fairy realm was often imagined as beautiful. That was part of the trap. Music more beautiful than anything heard in the human world. Food arranged in enormous feasts. people dancing under hills that appeared empty from the outside, rooms filled with light where there should have been darkness. Nothing had to look monstrous. It only had to make you stay. And some traditions warned against eating the food. A single meal could bind a human to the otherworld. Accepting hospitality meant accepting the rules of the place. But even those who escaped faced another danger: time. One of the oldest versions of this idea appears in the story of King Hurler, recorded by the English writer Walter Map in the 12th century. Hurler enters an underground realm belonging to a mysterious king. To him, the visit lasts only a few days. When he returns to the surface, the world has changed. The people he knew are gone. His kingdom is gone. Generations have passed. Roughly 2 centuries separate the world he remembers from the one he has returned to. Before leaving the supernatural realm, Hurler and his men had been warned not to dismount from their horses until a small dog they had been given jumped down first. Some of the men ignore the warning. The moment their feet touch the ground, they crumble into dust. That is the real horror behind the time stories. Not simply death, erasure. You enter a hill for a celebration. You come out into a world where nobody knows your name. Your children are ancient history. Your house disappeared generations ago. And everything that made you part of the human world has moved on without you. The hidden people did not need to kill you. They could steal your time. But some Scottish traditions offered an even darker explanation for why humans were taken at all. The Tyned. The Tithe to Hell. In the famous ballad of Tam Lin, the fairy company must pay a tribute to hell every 7 years. Tam Lin fears that he himself will be chosen. Other Scottish folklore took the idea further. One tradition claimed that human beings could be taken so that they might be given in place of the fairy folk themselves. In that version of the story, kidnapping was not random. A human life had value. Not because the fairies loved humanity, because humans could be used as payment. The idea changes the meaning of the changeling story. A missing child is no longer only a stolen child. The child may have been taken because someone else needed a substitute. And Scottish folklore developed other ways of dividing the hidden people. You sometimes encounter the words seelie and unseelie. Modern fantasy often turns them into 2 organized kingdoms, one good, one evil. The older tradition was less clean. Seelie beings might be more favorably disposed toward humans, but that did not mean safe. They could reward courtesy and punish insult. The unseelie name became associated with beings considered more hostile and dangerous. But this was not a universal map of fairy society. It was one Scottish way of describing a supernatural world that resisted simple categories. And along the Anglo-Scottish border, stories describe something far less ambiguous. The Redcap. A short, powerful old creature said to inhabit ruined castles and places associated with violence. He was described with long teeth, claw-like hands, and a heavy weapon. But his most memorable feature was his cap, bright red. According to the legend, the color came from human blood. The Redcap had to keep the cap wet with fresh blood, which meant every traveler approaching the wrong ruin could become his next victim. There was no elaborate bargain, no invitation to dance, no beautiful underground feast. The Redcap was simply waiting, and not every terror moving through this landscape was even described as a fairy. The boundaries between ghosts, spirits, demons, fairies, and older supernatural beings were often blurred. One of the strangest examples appears in an English chronicle under the year 1127. People near Peterborough claim to see a terrifying hunt moving through the countryside at night. Black hunters, dark horses, enormous hounds, hunting horns sounding through the darkness. The chronicler says the sightings continued for weeks. This belongs to the wider tradition now called the Wild Hunt. Across Northern Europe, its leader changed from story to story. Sometimes a god, sometimes a dead king, sometimes a supernatural hunter, sometimes a procession of the dead. The details changed, but the experience remained the same. You are outside at night. You hear the hounds before you see anything. Then the horns. Then riders appear where no riders should be. The sensible response was not to discover who they were, it was to get out of their path. The same landscape had other dangers, because even if you avoided the hills and the forests, there was still the water. Scotland was filled with rivers, burns, lochs, sea lochs, marshes, and dangerous crossings, and folklore populated them with predators. The Kelpie is probably the most famous, but modern retellings often mix the Kelpie with another creature. Traditional Kelpies were strongly associated with rivers, streams, and fords. They often appeared as horses. A traveller might see what looked like an ordinary animal standing near the water. The danger began when someone tried to ride it. The creature could suddenly charge into the river and drag the victim beneath the surface. A simple story with a simple warning. Do not trust the horse standing alone beside dangerous water. But the Highland water horse, known as the Uisge, was worse. It belonged to lochs and sea lochs, and it had one particularly horrifying trick. Imagine a tired traveller at the edge of a dark Scottish loch. The sun is disappearing, his clothes are wet, the road home is still miles away. Through the mist, he sees a powerful horse waiting beside the water. Calm, healthy, perfect. It does not run when he approaches. It allows him to climb onto its back. And then he tries to move his hands. He cannot. The creature's hide has become adhesive. His palms are fixed to it. His legs cannot pull free. Then the horse turns toward the loch. The traveller understands exactly what is about to happen. The Uisge plunges into the water. The victim disappears beneath the surface. And unlike stories in which the water horse simply drowns its rider, the Uisge was said to devour the body. In some versions, only the liver remained. It floated back to the surface after everything else was gone. The next morning, a family searching the shoreline did not find a body. They found what the creature had refused to eat. Further north, on the Orkney Islands, the folklore produced something that barely looked like an animal at all. The Nuckelavee, one of the most grotesque beings recorded in Orcadian tradition. The best-known 19th century description presents it as a monstrous fusion of horse and human. It had no skin. Its muscles were exposed. Dark blood could be seen moving through yellow veins. A huge human torso rose from the back of the horse, like body beneath it. Its breath was blamed for disease, for ruined crops, for dead livestock. Even the land itself seemed to rot when the Nuckelavee appeared. But it had one weakness: fresh running water. It could not cross it. That meant a stream could become the difference between survival and death. Again, folklore transformed the landscape into a map of invisible rules. A river could hide a Kelpie. A loch could hide an Uisge. A remote island could belong to the Nuckelavee. A mushroom ring could be a doorway. An ancient hill could have inhabitants. A ruined castle might have something waiting inside it. The world was not empty, and danger did not always announce itself with claws and teeth. Sometimes it arrived as a sound. In Ireland, perhaps the most famous example is the Banshee. Modern horror often turns her into a ghost that screams directly at a victim. But the older idea is more disturbing because the Banshee does not need to attack you. She warns you. Her name comes from the Irish Banshee, a woman associated with the fairy mound or Otherworld. She became particularly connected in tradition with certain old Irish families. Her cry was a keening, a sound of grief, and if it was heard near the house, it could mean that someone in the family was approaching death. Imagine waking to that sound outside your window. There is nothing to fight, no monster to stab with iron, no creature to chase away with salt. You simply know that the cry is supposed to mean death is coming. Then you look at the people sleeping around you and wonder who the warning is for. In the Scottish Highlands, another figure carried a similar message: the Nighe, the washer at the ford. A traveller approaching a lonely stream might hear the sound of wet clothing striking stone. At the water crouched a strange woman washing garments. Some descriptions make her small and deformed with unusual feet. But the most important detail is what she is washing. The clothing belongs to people who are about to die, often violently. The water around the garments is stained with blood. Imagine getting close enough to recognize one of them: a shirt, a coat, something you know, something you own. The horror is not that the washer attacks you. The horror is that she continues washing. Because, according to the story, whatever is coming has already begun. But the darkest part of this folklore was never the Redcap. It was not the Nuckelavee. It was not the creature hiding beneath a loch. The darkest part was what could happen when supernatural belief collided with real illness, fear, and human certainty. And for that, we do not have to return to the Middle Ages. We only have to go back to Ireland in 1895. By then, there were trains, telegraphs, photography, mass newspapers. The modern world was already arriving. And in a small house in County Tipperary, an old belief was about to help kill a real woman. Her name was Bridget Cleary. She was 26 years old. She worked as a dressmaker and milliner. She earned money of her own and owned a sewing machine, something that marked her as unusually independent for a woman in her rural community. Then Bridget became seriously ill. She developed fever and respiratory symptoms. A doctor eventually came. A priest came too. But inside the house, another explanation was taking hold. Her husband Michael began to believe that the woman lying sick in front of him was not really Bridget. He believed his wife had been taken. The person in the bed was a changeling. Think about how perfectly the old folklore could fit the situation. A healthy person suddenly changes. They become weak. Their appearance changes. They behave differently. They no longer seem like themselves. To a modern observer, these are symptoms of illness. To someone who accepts the changeling tradition literally, they can look like evidence of replacement. Other relatives and neighbours became involved. Bridget was restrained. She was forced to swallow a bitter herbal mixture. She was questioned repeatedly. "Are you Bridget Cleary? Are you Bridget Cleary?" Her answers were not enough. Because once a person becomes convinced they are speaking to an imposter, every denial becomes proof that the imposter is lying.
No.
The rituals became increasingly violent. Bridget was held close to the fire. She was threatened. People around her believed they were trying to force the supernatural intruder to reveal itself and release the real woman. Then the situation escalated beyond anything that could be undone. Michael attacked Bridget near the fire. Her clothing caught. Lamp oil was used. Bridget Cleary burned to death inside her own home. Her body was later hidden in a shallow grave. And even after she was dead, Michael did not behave like a man who believed he had murdered his wife. He still believed the real Bridget was somewhere else. He expected her to appear near a local fairy fort. According to the story he told, she would return riding a white horse. The dead woman in the grave was not his wife. The real Bridget could still be rescued. Police found the body. Michael Cleary was arrested and tried. He was convicted of manslaughter rather than murder and sentenced to 20 years of penal servitude. He ultimately served roughly 15. That happened in 1895. Not in some distant mythical age. Not before Christianity. Not before cities or newspapers. At the end of the 19th century, and that is the part of the old fairy tradition that no modern picture book can completely erase. The hidden people never had to be physically real to have real consequences. Belief could give people a way to explain illness, disability, miscarriage, sudden death, a missing traveller, a child who seemed different, a wife whose sickness frightened her family. Most of the time, those beliefs remained stories, customs, warnings, offerings, and small rituals passed from one generation to the next. But Bridget Cleary shows what could happen when fear became certainty. The old stories warned people about creatures hiding inside hills, about riders moving through the night, about horses waiting beside black water, about voices crying outside the house. But the darkest thing in those stories was never the monster in the hill. It was what a human being could do after becoming certain the monster was real.